NFL football, at its core, is a game governed by rules. What that means is that every single interaction in a game, from kickoffs and punts to passes and handoffs to tackles and sacks, to even the ball being snapped at the start of each play, are ultimately defined by these rules. Now, for the most part, the rules of the NFL are pretty straightforward. I mean, aside from a few notable exceptions. And these rules are relatively easy to follow, which is good because at any point in time during an NFL game, there will be 22 active players on the football field, 82 other players on the sideline, team staff, coaches, GMs, and other league personnel either on the sidelines, in the box, or watching the game who also have to be aware of these rules and understand them in depth as well. Hence, that doesn't even begin to account for the millions and millions of fans watching in the stadiums and at home each week, who also need to, at the very least, understand the basics of the NFL rules to enjoy what they're watching, or to just even get into the game. So, the fact that the NFL rules are pretty clear and straightforward for the most part is not only a good thing, but also, to a degree, necessary for the league to even function. But sometimes the rules aren't clear, and there are exceptions, and we need some help interpreting them. Or someone might break the rules, and an appropriate penalty needs to be enforced. Well, lucky for us, the NFL has a system in place for that as well. And the people enforcing that system are the referees. NFL referees are controversial, to put it kindly. Really, they've always been since the start of the game. From the Hail Mary no call in the 1975 NFC Championship game to the tuck rule to even topics like football moves and the whole what is a catch debate of the mid 2010s. NFL referees have seemingly always been under fire for something controversial. And for the most part, a lot of the criticism lobbied against the referees is somewhat justified in these instances. After all, they're the ones interpreting and enforcing these NFL rules, and the decisions they make in games absolutely matter because they set a precedent for what should happen, or what should or should not be called should a similar situation occur in the future. Think of it kind of like a legal court that makes a groundbreaking ruling. That ruling is the precedent, and it's what a lot of courts in the future will use to make similar calls. This is also true in the NFL. Let's look at that Hail Mary no call in 1975 for an example of this concept in action. Many people at the time thought that Cowboys receiver Drew Pearson held the defender on the play that ended up becoming the Hail Mary. Of course, Drew Pearson catches the ball, scores, the Cowboys win the NFC Championship game and go on to win the Super Bowl. So this call absolutely had a huge effect on the season and who ended up winning the Super Bowl. And if the referee at the time, Armin Terzian, enforced an offensive pass interference penalty on that play on Drew Pearson, the Hail Mary, as we know it, just might not exist. Or at the very least, it wouldn't be nearly as famous of a play as it is today. Not only that, the Cowboys wouldn't have won that Super Bowl and would not have become a dynasty in the mid-1970s. But Armin Terzian didn't make the offensive pass interference call. And we do have the Hail Mary, and it's now an NFL staple. And the Cowboys, of course, had a dynasty. A precedent had been set. And if you'll notice on a lot of future Hail Mary calls that look somewhat similar, the ref will not call offensive pass interference. But that's not all here. NFL referees and the calls they make, I've emphasized this before, if they're important enough, can impact the results of a game and seasons, and perhaps even decades of NFL football. Without the tuck rule call going their way, the Patriots probably lose that game to the Raiders and don't end up winning the Super Bowl that year. Tom Brady likely gets benched for Drew Bledsoe. At least to start the 0-2 season anyways. I mean, this is Tom Brady we're talking about. He's going to beat out Drew Bledsoe for that job at some point. It's just gonna happen. You don't keep down the GOAT. But that's besides the point. Without that tuck rule call, the Patriots might not have become the dynasty we know them as. And calls like the tuck rule and the Hail Mary no call emphasize that the calls these referees are making in NFL games actually matter. And due to this fact, NFL referees are highly scrutinized and often the target for criticism by fans, especially when they make these controversial decisions. And because these referees are people who can make mistakes from time to time, they might not get every call right. Remember that whole mess at the end of the Cowboys-Lions game this year? The refs made an objectively bad call on the two-point conversion, which cost Detroit the game, the number 1 seed in the NFC, and possibly a Super Bowl berth. So yeah, this stuff matters. And when these referees make a call and get it wrong, or they just make an unpopular decision, even if it is the right call, the backlash is bad. Like, really bad. Like, people will literally try to kill them bad. Yeah, you heard that right. People have tried to murder a referee over what they thought was a bad call before. Who, you may ask, was this unfortunate referee whose life was put in such peril because of the wrath of NFL fans? Well, funny enough, there's someone I've actually mentioned in this video already. It's that referee from the 1975 Dallas Cowboy Minnesota Vikings NFC Championship game, Armen Terzian. Following Terzian's decision in the 1975 championship game, the home fans, the Minnesota Vikings fans, were shocked and outraged. They really thought Drew Pearson committed pass interference on that play, and they just saw their Super Bowl hopes slipping away. So it's understandable that they'd be a little bit upset. But they were so upset that they started throwing trash and debris on the field in protest on what they saw as a bad call. One fan, though, who I have to assume was either very, very drunk or some sort of psychopath, had the bright idea to aim a half-filled whiskey bottle at Armen Terzian's head. Of course, other fans were throwing bottles and stuff like that on the field as well, but this particular bottle was aimed, and it actually managed to hit Armen Terzian in the back of the head, knocking him unconscious on the field. After this, play had to be stopped, and medical teams were rushed in to make sure that Terzian was still alive. And luckily for him and his family, he actually ended up okay out of all of this. He was bandaged up and he was taken to the hospital, where it was determined he luckily didn't need stitches for his injury. But that's not the point here. Someone actually almost killed the referee in broad daylight during one of the most important games of the 1975 season just because he didn't call an offensive pass interference on Drew Pearson. And what's more is, if you watch the film of this game, and particularly of this play, I actually think Armen Terzian was right not to make this call. Or, at the very least, from the camera angles I have available to me on YouTube, it's not entirely clear that Drew Pearson commits offensive pass interference. And I'll be frank here, it's not like it's Armen Terzian's fault the Minnesota Vikings cornerbacks couldn't cover Drew Pearson in a 2-on-1 matchup. That's on them. So, sorry Vikings fans, you're wrong here. And I cannot believe I have to say this, but trying to kill the officials just because they made a call you do not like is not okay. What happened to Armen Terzian on the field was disgusting and completely not in the spirit of NFL football. I don't care how controversial of an official he was throughout his career, or how much the Minnesota Vikings fans disliked that call back in '75. They had no right to physically attack, let alone try to kill him. Especially considering he made the objective correct call, in my mind. And one can only hope that the person who threw that bottle at him, trying to kill him, was caught and prosecuted. Now, before I get any deeper into the whole rabbit hole here, let's get back on track. Fair or not, NFL referees are constantly under fire for the calls they make. And in fact, over the past few years, we've seen this increase, so much so that people are calling to replace NFL refs entirely, using some sort of like advanced computer system and cameras and analytics to enforce the rules here. But are NFL refs really as bad at their jobs as people think they are? Or are there other factors at play here that actively inhibiting the ability of NFL referees to properly do their jobs at the highest level? And factors that are preventing the NFL from bringing in new talent to help them out? And ultimately, is there a solution to all of this? As you'll see, the answer to these questions is actually quite complex. To kick off this discussion, I want to throw out a couple numbers. 18.4. That's the average number of calls an NFL ref must make per game. Obviously, you can't make 4/10 of a call, so I'll round that up to about 19 calls a game. 18 to 19 calls. That sounds about right. Second number I want to throw out is 97. What's that, you might ask? Well, according to the International Journal of Sports Science, that's the percent of on-field calls the NFL refs get correct. 97%. So out of maybe these 18 or 19 calls per game, NFL refs might be getting one wrong. That's pretty good, all things considered. So to answer the immediate question here on if the NFL refs are bad at their jobs, I'm going to say no. They're not nearly as bad at their jobs as people think they are. Or at the very least, they're not nearly as bad at their jobs as NBA referees are in the year 2024. Actually, all things considered, NFL refs are pretty darn good at their jobs. Go figure. But that's not to say that things are amazing here. After all, the refs are still wrong about 3% of the time, and there are quite a few examples in online compilations of NFL refs making objectively bad decisions. And there are factors out there, of course, that prevent them from doing their jobs to the best of their abilities, and are preventing the NFL from bringing in new reffing talent. So let's talk about that. If you ask me, the single biggest thing that prevents NFL referees from doing their jobs properly, so to speak, is the very nature of the job itself. Because unlike NFL coaches, players, and people managing the league offices and networks, referees are not full-time employees of the NFL. You heard that right. The dude who took your order at McDonald's the other day could be an NFL referee. Your homeroom teacher from 7th grade, also an NFL ref. That random uncle you see only once every couple months at the family barbecue. You better believe he's an NFL referee. And while the examples I just put out there might be a bit exaggerated, the fact of the matter is that oftentimes NFL referees have other jobs and do things outside of football. Just to give a few examples, Carl Cheffers, who called the Super Bowl back in 2023 and has been an NFL referee for 16 years, is also a sales manager. Clete Bakeman, who's been an NFL referee since 2010, is an attorney at law. 10-year veteran Brad Allen, the same guy who made the controversial call in the Cowboys-Lions game, is also a non-profit organization's CEO. Why are the NFL's top referees taking up these other gigs, exactly? They should be focused solely on football, you would think, right? Well, not quite. That brings us to another problem, because the NFL refs only get paid for the games they actually work. And according to online sources, they're earning about $6,000 to $10,000 per regular season game they referee, and a bit more in the playoffs. And yeah, that's a nice chunk of money on a per game basis. You have to keep in mind, not every referee works a game each week, and certainly not every referee gets the opportunity to ref a playoff game. That's only reserved for the highest rated referees. So, the money these referees are supposedly getting for doing their jobs isn't guaranteed. And because the money they're supposed to be getting for doing this job isn't guaranteed, it necessitates having a second, more stable income to compensate. And because these referees have other jobs and things outside of football they have to focus on, that naturally means they can't all of their time to really understanding the game and its rules to the absolute highest level like they should be able to. And while the NFL does host at least 2 clinics on a yearly basis to review the rules and ensure these refs meet physical standards, as well as regularly evaluate their performance, send them to OTAs, camps, and preseason games to prepare for the season, the fact still remains that once the season ends, these guys have to find other ways to support themselves and their families financially. And yes, $6,000 to $10,000 per game is a large chunk of change. But again, not every ref gets to officiate a game each week. And that aside, you'd be surprised how quickly money can disappear when you have to pay for things like medical coverage, housing, food, and travel to go to your job. What's more is that these NFL referees are on year-to-year contracts, so they aren't even guaranteed to have their job with the league on a year-to-year basis should they struggle. Now, let's talk about ref age and experience because this also factors into the discussion here. If you look the average age of the 122 referees in the NFL and the experience they have, you'll find that the average ref is 52 years old and has been reffing football games in some capacity for at least 10 to 20 years. So, NFL refs tend to be on the older side and have a lot of experience. Makes sense. You would hope that they have a lot of experience reffing games. They're reffing at the highest level. And what's more is that overall, these refs have had at least 10 to 20 years of previous experience reffing high school and college games. Why do I say that? Well, because before you're even allowed to apply to be an NFL official, you have to have that on your resume. It's a requirement. And that's really good in terms of knowledge and experience and all that stuff. But maybe not so much in terms of bringing in fresh new ideas and cultivating young talent in the NFL reffing sphere. And let's talk about that latter point for a second. If you wanted to enter the NFL reffing field, so to speak, you would have to spend half a lifetime making calls on the sidelines of high school and college games before you can even try to apply. And then, after you ref those high school and college games for 10 to 20 years, and you're able to apply to join an NFL officiating crew, you have to beat out 44,000 other annual applicants. And then you have to work your way up through the ranks for another few years of the NFL reffing sphere before you can even step onto the field and ref an actual NFL game. So that's a lot of time. And what if you mess up or make some sort of small mistake? Well, naturally, you'll get demoted, or your year-to-year contract will expire and the league won't renew it, leaving you out of luck and out of a job. What's more is that for the 17 or so weeks you are supposed to be working for the league, you're not even guaranteed to, which means you might not even get a game check every week. So, dear viewer, tell me, would you want to be an NFL referee, given all of the stuff that I just laid out there? Would you want to work in an unstable, part-time profession where you have to work decades just to get to the starting point? Where the constant risk, demotion, and a significant pay dock, or the loss of your job is ever present and hanging above you? Where you're faced with constant public scrutiny over every decision you make, or the prospect of real, actual physical harm to your person should someone merely disagree with a call you make on the field. Call, mind you, which is likely correct. Where you have to be physically on par with the top 1% of athletes just so you can follow what they're doing on the field and try to enforce the rules of a violent game they're playing for millions of dollars. Where you pretty much have to get a second job anyways, just to ensure you have a stable source of money year-round. Let's also not forget the fact that you also have to memorize all of the obscure hand gestures and body motions for every NFL penalty, and the entire NFL rulebook word for word. Oh, by the way, that rulebook has 85 pages of rules and legal text and sees multiple major changes annually. You're going to have to memorize that, word for word. And sure, the per game pay and benefits are nice, but that's about it. And if you ask me, I certainly can't say that being an NFL referee is exactly a desirable career path for someone to pursue. I'd imagine you'd think likewise. Most people think that way. which is why so many amateur referees or even semi-professional referees don't even bother to apply for the pros. Which, of course, means the NFL has a limited talent pool to choose from and keeps bringing back the same guys year over year. And so the cycle continues. So basically, to sum things up here, being an NFL referee is extremely hard and unrewarded. It's a decades-long process just to become an NFL referee. And once you do manage to get the gig, you're under constant public scrutiny, you have to have a second job because your pay isn't guaranteed, and the rules you have to learn are ever-changing. I didn't even mention the technology NFL refs are allowed to use to help them make decisions. People have been clamoring for the NFL to introduce more technology into the game for years to help these guys, and it hasn't for some reason. And it's not like these requests are without merit either. I mean, in the year 2024, NFL refs still use literal chains to measure first downs, and a game clock that only shows time to the nearest whole second. And while the chain is objectively awesome, I mean, it's a chain. Come on. It's also extremely archaic. Like, come on, guys. We're using a literal metal chain to track first downs here. And again, that's awesome. But you could, use a laser sensor or anything slightly more precise to do that. It'd be an immediate step up for the referees and it'd make their jobs infinitely easier. And it's these factors, as well as the other ones I mentioned earlier, that make the jobs of NFL referees so difficult, so unrewarding, and so undesirable. And as a result, it's inhibiting not only them from focusing on football and doing their jobs at the absolute highest level they could, but also inhibiting the NFL itself from not only bringing in new talent and injecting fresh ideas into its officiating process, but ensuring that its rules are properly enforced. That, of course, is not to say the NFL refs are actually bad at their jobs. And despite these factors working against them, they're pretty good for the most part. But again, being 97% correct and making calls 97% of the time correct is not the same as being 100% correct or making calls correct every time. They could be better, and the poor decisions these refs sometimes make in games will lead to major controversies, affecting the outcome of games and seasons in a way they shouldn't. And that just hurts the league as a whole. Which now brings us to the other part of this video. How can this officiating problem be resolved? Can we make the jobs of referees easier? Because, like it or not, refs are not going to be replaced by AI supercomputers. They are not going away, and there is always going to be some human being on the sideline making judgment calls about the rules. So let's make their lives just a bit easier here. And for starters, the NFL could hire these guys as full-time employees, and giving them a stable salary and the time they need to actually understand the game at its absolute highest level would undoubtedly lead to a better product on the field. Because they would have the time to understand the rules, they'd be less likely to make bad decisions and poor judgments in game. The NFL also would need to make the pathway to becoming an NFL referee much more streamlined and easier for people. 2 decades of work experience before getting into a job is great, but it also means you have to sink 2 decades of your life just to get to that point. And a lot of people aren't going to be willing to do that. So the NFL has to make it easier for more reffing talent to get into the pool. And because more talent is going to be brought in by making the pool more accessible, it would bring more perspectives and ideas to the game, which would again, overall, improve the outcome and the product on the field. And finally, the NFL absolutely needs to introduce more technology into the game. Better cameras, better clocks, and better tracking equipment could really go a long way into helping these guys on the field make these calls. I mean, again, we're using a chain to measure first downs and tracking time to the nearest whole second. The point is, there's a lot the NFL can and should do to ensure referees can perform their jobs at the best of their abilities, and they're not doing it right now. but hopefully they will in the future. Hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy making football videos on YouTube, and I could be entirely wrong here, and the referees could be terrible, and so on and so forth. But I don't quite think that's the case, and hopefully after watching this video, you don't either. So yeah, basically the NFL refs and the issues surrounding them are a lot more complex than we typically think they are or like to give credit to. But despite that, the NFL refs today are a major part of the NFL, and they're firmly here to stay. And they're doing a pretty good job. 97% correct most calls is pretty good, I'd say. So, rather than us literally trying to kill them from doing their job correctly 97% of the time, and ostracizing them off of one bad call every so often, let's instead help the refs with that other 3%. And who knows, if we can do that, then maybe, just maybe, things will get a little bit better for the NFL in terms of enforcing its rules and in terms of the referees. Or maybe not. Again, who knows? And after all, a guy can only dream. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you in the next one.